Okay, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session at PLMW, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Simon Peter Jones. I don't think he needs much of an introduction, but I will do one anyway. So he's currently an engineering fellow at Epic Games since 2022, and before that, he spent 7 years as a lecturer at University College London, and 9 years as a professor at Glasgow University, and 24 years at Microsoft Research Cambridge. And Simon is broadly interested in lots of language design and implementation and applications, and among many things, he is one of the key developer and contributor to the Glasgow Haskell compiler. And I always love Simon's presentation because he's so energetic and entertaining, and I'm sure you will know what I mean after this talk. And Simon will be taking questions during the talk, and I will be passing the mic around, so if you have a question, just raise your hand. So Simon, take it away.
Okay, good, thank you. Thanks very much, it's great to be here. I've never done this before. That is, I have read a research paper before, but I have not given a talk about how to read a research paper before. I've given many talks about how to write a paper, so this is a new experience for me. And I've arranged the room in a sort of more circular fashion because this is a topic about which nobody has a monopoly on truth. And I would love to hear from you about your thoughts and opinions and comments as we go along. Don't wait till the end. And in fact, my goal is that after 20 minutes, I'll be done talking. We can just have a conversation with each other. And indeed, there are quite a few senior people in the room who can heckle and say, no, just ignore everything Simon says and do this instead. So that's why we're facing each other, because I don't want it to be a kind of like a hub and spoke model for an airline, but more like a sort of network thing. We talk to each other, not just talk to me. Okay? Yeah, that's right, so, but I'm going to fade away. My goal is that I can more or less disappear, leaving only my smile behind, like the Cheshire Cat, and you will have a good time together. Okay, now, there's not enough chairs, but there's one, two. The reason there's not enough chairs is they cost €4 each to have new chairs. That seems a bit stingy, don't you think? Well, anyway, so there's a few at the front here, so please come and join us, if you like, and enjoy sitting at the back. Now, right, and so here's the plan then. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of trying to seed the conversation by suggesting 7 simple ideas that I have distilled out of when I started to think about how do I read research papers? And then I hope we'll turn into just a discussion with each other. So I think we've got 40. It's for the people online, so it's a courtesy to them, but I don't want that to interrupt our flow. So just start to speak, ning ning, and somebody else take the other microphone to be physically the other side of the room. Here, that's great. So get your microphone as soon as you can, but don't let that stop you, right? We're just going to have a conversation together. Good. Okay, so here is my first thought about this. I'd like you to read research papers with joy, right? Approach it in this sort of positive attitude. Look, a paper is like a gift that somebody A few minutes ago said, oh, I sometimes read papers just to learn how to write. Yeah, so just to try to, because your advisor may say, this is a well-written paper, learn from it. Good thing, okay. But the trouble is that even with all this in mind, there are too many papers, right? It's overwhelming. And the trouble is you can feel crushed by this. You can feel like a worm, right, under this tidal wave of intellectual, amazingness. But the thing is, you just got to start somewhere. One a week, one every 2 weeks, just start chugging. If you try to, do everything once, you won't do it. So, read with purpose. That was the second thing. Right. What's the third? Usually trying to set up the problem they're trying to solve and perhaps sketch a little bit about how they're going to do it, but more particularly, good introductions have a bulleted list of contributions. I'm highly opinionated on this score. If you think I'm going to be a reviewer of your paper, make sure you have a bulleted list of contributions in your introduction, right? Bullets, right? So there is no doubt in the author's mind no doubt in the reader's mind what the author thinks the contributions of the paper are. Okay. And key examples, contribution, problems, yes. Okay. What do other people think? So anybody, what do you do in your, I think probably many people have this algorithm, do a quick read. What else do you look for? Yeah.
Keywords.
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 Keywords?
Yes.
What sort of keywords?
For example, if it's a problem about encryption, you might be looking for encryption methods and stuff like that.
Right. So keywords that are of interest to you. Right, so if you're interested in quantum computing, look for quantum, right? And actually, key anti-words are also good. If a paper mentions security in the introduction or the abstract, I generally think, okay, I'm not going to read that. Mainly because I think, it's a really interesting and important problem, but I'm so glad that other people are interested in it, because then I don't have to be. Anybody else? Yeah. Samantha, go.
Yeah. I look at the code or the maths. I think, okay, I've got the idea of the problem. Are you solving it the way I think you would? And you can sort of get that by looking at the different code snippets and see if they're doing what you think they're...
The code, actually the program code?
If they've put snippets in, or if it's maths or anything like that.
Yeah, okay.
Related work. So if they have a section where they sort of discuss this is how this links to everything else, that I skim that to try and see, is this actually related to what I thought it originally was?
I see. You're not really reading the related work because you want to understand it. You're interested because it may point to something you already do know about. And you think, okay, so now they're showing the connection to something. Yeah, good. Thanks. Anyone else? Yeah, go. Ed, and can you pass the microphone to the back?
Sure. I think this kind of goes a little bit past the skimming part, but like the thing I do when I first grab a paper is I look at all the things that they purport to need. They say, oh, I need X and Y and Z in order to do this, or whatever it is, whatever those assumptions are. And I try to knock one of them out. All right, I look through the rest of the paper to see if they actually used them all. right? Because more often than not, you can usually get away with pulling one of the legs off of that centipede and see it still crawl.
See, dead code elimination.
Yes.
Dead assumption elimination.
Now that goes past skimming. That'd be the next stage.
Right, thanks. Stefan?
So for older papers, I like to look at the papers that cite it and figure out what context they're citing it in. And so what do other researchers think is important, are the important ideas from that paper?
And do you have a mechanism for doing that you regularly use?
Not well. I always
citation.
Yeah, I always struggle to find. I mean, most databases will have the forward citation link. I always struggle to find it though. They don't usually make it obvious.
The ACM Digital Library.
ACMDL has its. I should just remember exactly what sequence of buttons to click in the ACM Digital Library to do it, but it is there.
Good. Anyone else? We're still on skimming. Yeah, please.
Sort of related to what was said a second ago, I like to look at what are the limitations, like what in the future work section, it's usually laid out nicely.
So even in skimming, you look at future work.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, the first paragraph of the conclusion is a very good thing to skim because the introduction will often set out, here's some interesting problem, and it's the first paragraph of the conclusion where you say, and we've solved that problem, and that problem turns out to be hard, and that's unsolvable. And like, to what extent did they actually meet the thing they set out in the introduction is often you don't find out until the very end.
Oh, so you read the conclusion?
Like skim it, yeah. I was flick to the end and see what's there.
Interesting. So I generally don't read conclusions because in my experience it usually says, well, we said we'd do all this and sure enough we did. And so I haven't really learned anything. In fact, what I have learned is that it takes precious column inches, so I no longer write conclusions on my papers, I just stop.
Oh, I already have a mic, yeah. Thanks. So I kind of do the same thing. I think the problem is actually the most important thing. I think usually when I listen to a talk or when I read a paper, I really try to understand once I've understood the definition of the problem, I spend most of my time on that. More maybe even than on the technical meat, because once I understand the specification and I understand this is the design space, then usually that helps me decide, do I really want to go into the technical details and understand the typing rules and the proofs that they've done? Or is it, that's one of the key takeaways that I try to get from the paper is what clearly defined problem did they manage to solve? And that helps me determine whether I want to go on to the 3B, so to speak. Yeah. So before kind of deciding whether you were going to read a paper line by line and understand all the typing rules, put as much time as you can into understanding why the authors wrote this paper.
What is the problem you are trying to solve? And you, as a reader, should be able to answer that question. Yes. Yeah.
I wanted to say that I kind of agree with going to the conclusion. That's often the second section of the paper that I'll read. Sometimes authors aren't, they don't put that nice little bulleted list of contributions, and so I'm left at the end wondering, okay, what did you do? And that's a nice place that they will sometimes sneak at the end, this is what I've accomplished. But also, if I'm a little bit confused, they will sometimes restate it in a more useful way if the introduction had some issues, and then that can kind of back up or kind of confirm, did they do what they said that they did, or kind of is it a little bit different? So that's a good kind of check before going on to the next step.
Okay, keep that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this counts, but sometimes instead of skimming the paper first, I go for the talk slides and see if I can make sense of the first few slides, and then I skim the introduction.
That's interesting. You look at the slides for the talk. My experience is, for what it's worth, is that the slides for the talk are almost meaningless without the soundtrack, and the soundtrack takes too long. But if it works for you, go for it. Like the that.
Sometimes I look at the theme or the philosophy of the paper. So not just what problem they're solving, but why it's a worthwhile problem to solve. So we're taking a bit of the PR landscape and we're making it more usable or generic or efficient. And so what's the general family of philosophy of the research, if that makes sense?
That sounds like a deep question for a skin release, but good on you. Okay, one more, yeah, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, on the same topic is looking if we're benchmarking on stuff like that in the paper, which in a way prove that there is an implementation application of a result, or if it was written in a more theoretical mind of view.
Yeah, so going to, did I put results yet? I said perhaps results, because, and so for a theory paper that might be what theorems do they prove, for an implementation paper it might be what those make you salivate, think, oh, I wish I could do that. Surely that's impossible. That's a great motivator. Yeah. Okay. Oh, one more. Matthias, yes. Is that on? Yes, or maybe I turned it off.
Yeah. So, I also look at the authors, right? If it's like someone that I know is doing something related to my work, I'm like, yeah, I should probably know about this as well. Just it's not the final thing, but it's often good. Yeah, okay, I like this style of paper, so I usually check that as well.
Yeah, all this is important too. Yeah. Good. Okay, one more. I
have just a couple more words there, which is, we were talking about benchmarks just a second ago, right? To me, I look at the benchmarks to figure out how much I should care. And the reason is really the fact that I can spend an unbounded amount of time optimizing a thing, and if I can see in this paper that they only get 2% for all of this effort or whatever it is, I will usually shut my brain off, or I will figure out and put a bookmark on it and stack rank it with the other things.
Or even actually, I often think if I look at one conference, one PLDI conference, in which every paper says I get 20% improvement, you think 20% to the power of 40, which is PLDI papers, that would be like... Yeah. So sometimes even to get, as you say, small improvements takes a lot of effort. Yeah. And other thing for benchmarks, this is a little ancillary. When you're reading a paper, when you're thinking about improvements, numerical improvements, be careful about the baseline, right? If you've got a very, low bar and, a lambda calculus interpreter and you made it go faster, that's not very interesting. You want to say, I've got the best compiler in the world and I made that go faster. Otherwise, you're optimizing for the wrong thing. And that happens surprisingly often. Okay, so skim read, now deeper read. So I still think it's worth limiting. Give it an hour, a good hour, but don't just get completely stuck. And be prepared to give up if you time out. That's my longer read. What did I say? Oh, now on to something else. Anybody else got anything to add to this? Ron.
So just to add to what you said, one of the don't stall and read linearly go together really nicely, because sometimes the thing you need to know that you're stalling on, you'll find out later if you just keep going, and that just the ordering of the paper might not be right.
That's true. Yeah. More often you would hope that the author would put the things you need earlier, but not always, as you say. Yeah. Yes, please.
The assumption that you should read linearly, you are assuming that the others also wrote linearly, and this might not always be the case?
So, no, I'm not assuming that the authors wrote it in that order, but they intended you to read it in that order. I never write a paper linearly. I'm sort of all over the place, but I'm all the time thinking about a linear reader, for what it's worth. Bartosz.
Yeah. So I always read a paper with a piece of paper and a pencil. Take notes. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay,
keep going. My goal is not to say anything more today.
Right. and often I kind of rewrite the paper because I often have my own notation that I'm used to, and I'm just like going through the paper and translating it into my notation. Plus, I'm drawing a lot of pictures, diagrams, and stuff like this.
He does that when you do in-person explanations for him too.
I mean, you have to bear in mind, you have to correct for the fact that Bartosz is an extremely clever person. Not everything that works for Bartosz. You're like an extreme outlier here. Go, Matthias, no. Anybody else wants to say? I just want, so in this deeper read, the fourth thing I wanted to talk about is reading critically, right? So I think over me is good. You will all have mechanisms that work for you, but use them actively. Yeah, Phil.
You're probably going to say this, Simon, but feeding those scribbles back to the authors if you're reviewing or if they're colleagues really helps them, because they've written the paper knowing what it says, and what's useful for the authors is to know what someone reading the paper didn't understand and where things are out of order or unexplained.
Yes, and this is a frequent failure mode for reviewers, is that if you ask a friend to review, I ask Phil to look at my paper, and he comes back and says, well, you know, on page 3 there's a missing question mark. I think, I don't need you to tell me that, right? I need you to tell me that on page 3, at line 3, that's where I got lost. I just lost your third there. I was with you until then, but reviewers don't do that unless you really ask them to. This is friendly reviewers, your friends who, it's a little side thing about reviewing. Yeah, anything else about reading critically? So nothing about reading critically. Oh, sorry, Richard, yes, here, go.
Sometimes, you know, thinking about taking notes, sometimes I find that translating is helpful. And I you know, so if there's a paper that's based in some programming language and, you know, like it's something about Scala, and it's like, oh, I would understand this better in Haskell. So I'll translate their work into Haskell, say, and then that will give me a better understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah. And it reminds me, too, that you were talking about looking for code, that I often look for the typewriter font in a paper. So, you know, I zoom ahead until I have an actual piece of program. No, not mathematics, no Greek. Yes.
It's more of a question than a comment. So at the first point, you mentioned this failure mode, and do you find this changes over time? Does it get easier for you?
No, I tell you, it remains a failure mode. But I think I frequently feel, oh, Simon, if you were just a bit clever, you'd have no problem with this. But it no longer makes me feel inadequate or unworthy. perhaps I should say. It makes me feel a bit frustrated. If only I could get this, right? And clearly the authors have got, there is something clever going on here. I wish I could get it, but I don't feel, therefore I am unworthy even to be in the room. So, and that is the, I think, the corrosive emotion, right, that we want to avoid. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I also do feel like some ideas just take time, to understand properly. So sometimes you just need to read something, then take a break, think about it, and get into it later. And so you have this illumination that, oh yeah, okay, I understand how it works. Like, it's not always, you don't have to understand the thing on the first try, right?
Yeah, so
right.
indeed, let's see.
Right.
I'm not going to say anything about pass four, but pass four is where you decide to commit to a paper because you're
right.
really interested. And that's where you do the repeated things you were saying. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Ed, go.
Yeah, to the earlier point about translating it into another language or into your own notation, right? For me, I'll just translate it into Haskell, from Haskell, no matter what. Like whatever they gave me. But like the reason is like I'll typically like add invariants, right? Like to me, those are where I get power. Like I realized earlier I talked about taking them away. Take away the ones that they assume and just impose my own, right? Like I'm only going to do this for integers. I'm going to do it for something stupid and obvious. And therefore, what can I get away with? Because now I've got extra laws available to me. What can I use to simplify this? What can I strip it down, get it down to the minimum possible viable piece of executable code that I can see operating right in front of me? Right.
Yeah, also this failure mode doesn't matter that much. So I have, for example, a paper that is pretty much fundamental to what I do. So I work with data types which are fixed point of functors. And I had no formal category theory schooling, so I didn't know what that meant at the beginning. So I had some proofs I had to do, and I could do the proofs, but I didn't understand why they were there. And it took like 2 summer schools of distinct category theory lectures to approach the point where I could read the original paper with understanding it and not just skipping over the whole technical section. But it's still fine. I was still able to do the work, even though I didn't understand how it worked underneath. So the failure mode is not that bad.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, and the back, is it Lee? Whoops.
I don't know if this is just me, but I find another common failure mode is I lose sight of the original problem. Like I develop a stack of sub-problems as I read through the paper, and then I forget what the original problem is. And sometimes if I just ask myself what's the original problem that they're trying to solve, then the thing that's confusing, the thing that I get stuck on or I stall on becomes clearer.
Good. So that lets me segue to idea 5, which is
The luxuries we have in computer science that you can replicate the experiment, right? So that really helps me sometimes.
you can execute the paper. Good. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the thing that Richard said reminds me, like, I feel like I take a similar approach to like reviewing code is like, oh, could I implement this better? Oh, maybe not. Like, this is like the best way to implement it. So I think that you can apply that to the code as well as just like the writing.
when I'm just sort of thinking, well, I wonder if I'm interested in this, right? I'm forced to. And in some ways, that's lovely, because you think, I really have to do this. So then I think it's helpful to think, what am I going to get out of this review? Or how am I going to express my opinion of this paper? So here's my little plan. A short evaluation, and then a series of bullets kind of addressing the larger issues that I think about the paper. I often will do this at the end, right, in retrospect, so I don't do this right at the beginning. And then a clearly delineated section that's more or less, on line 472, you have this variable s, and I can't find a definition of it. What is it? Or maybe this is just a plain typo. Or, I mean, there's lots of things, or lots of detailed suggestions, which are still very useful to the author, right, but which it's helpful to separate off from the larger issues. The larger issues are typically the ones that are more valuable to the reader, except for the smaller ones saying, I got lost at this line. At this point, I was with you, and now I'm lost. That's really helpful. And do not be ashamed to say that in your review. You are the reviewer. You are the person who they are trying to convince, and you must tell them where you stopped being convinced. That is a generous thing to do, provided you do it in the right kind of, did I say something about language? Yes, in the right kind of language. Right, so if you say, this is a terrible paper, it's badly written, and the authors were clearly, asleep half the time, that's a destructive thing to say. But if you say instead, I got lost in section 3, and I really did try several times to understand this section. I was with you until then, but I really got lost. I wonder if you are trying to say this kind of thing, or maybe I didn't see a list of contributions, but I wonder if you meant, I think your main contribution of the paper, having read it, is this. Do you agree? And if so, could you say so more clearly? Then you're providing not just critique, but also a way to respond to the critique, right? You're making constructive suggestions. So I don't want you to be less critical, but speaking in the first person means that you're not saying your paper is bad or you are wrong. You're saying, I don't understand how you are right. And by implication, it's your job to convince me, the reader, any reader, that you are right, so it's useful information to you. So I think that softens the impact. Obviously, as a recipient of a review, it's very painful to hear, apparently well-qualified reviewers slagging off your paper. So a bit of care with language is real help for the reviewers. Not pulling your punches, but being careful how you phrase them and personalizing. Almost it's your shortcoming. I'm really sorry, I'm just not clever enough to understand this. That's still useful. Okay, what else did I want to say here? Often reviews, you're asked to sort of summarize the paper, and I generally devote little or no attention to that because the paper should be its own summary, the introduction. So I find it's a bit of a waste of time in a review, unless you feel the paper has not summarized its own contributions well, in which case you can say, I wish you'd summarized contributions better, and here's what I would say. I put here, try not to be wishy-washy. So often we're on an A, B, C, D scale, and it's very tempting to go for B or C. Now, and sometimes that's the right thing to do, but always think, couldn't I possibly say A, right? This is actually quite a good paper. Yes, it has shortcomings, but it is a very cool idea. And I think the authors could address the shortcomings in their revision, So, or alternatively, you may say, it's just never going to get there in this round. I'm giving you a D, but there are things I really like here, but I don't know. It's trying to promote a dialogue, actually, in this case, with the other members of the program committee, right? You can fight with them. If everything's B's and C's, it's all sort of, so there's a bit of this, a bit of that. Now, last thing, time. So reviewing papers can be very time-consuming. I tend to, these days anyway, I think I did less so when I was at an earlier stage of my life. I try to time box. I usually do, about an hour's solid read of the paper, and at least an hour, probably 2, writing a review, and that will probably mean going back to reading again. But not a whole day for a paper, right? I just think that's too much to ask for reviewers. You get burnt-out reviewers, and you think, I don't want to review this paper. And it is, remember, the author's job to convince you. It is not your job to spend, a significant fraction of your life trying to elicit what the authors are trying to say. That's it. Sounds harsh, but it is, I think, it's the truth. So I think you'll get worn out reviewing if you take it too, if you don't sort of time limit it. That's my advice, for what it's worth. Yes, Phil.
I think And 1 hour, I'm sure, works for you, Simon. If you're reviewing your first paper, you probably need to more or less double that when you start out. Second question, you talked about evaluation of the paper. Does that include situating it in the current body of research?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what I was thinking when I wrote that, which was my opinion as a reviewer of, is this a sufficiently large contribution to knowledge that I would like to see it at the conference? Now, if it's completely ill-situated, for example, if it has an absent related work section or fails to cite work that seems to be very relevant and maybe even seems to do the same thing, that's a big black mark, right? Because then the authors appear to be ignorant of something that is directly relevant. That would be a situation. But if you think, it is amazing, but I do wish they'd drawn the connection to this other work, I might just say that in the review, but still give it a high rating. Do you see what I mean? Yep. Yeah. Let's go.
Yep. Conferences, you know that the review is due in a few weeks and you have 7 papers that you all need to read. And for if you accept a review for a journal, you know that it's a commitment, and it's a long-term commitment because you might get a new version of the paper that you need to review also. And then I try to be more critical in accepting reviews for journals because it's a longer commitment, and I spend much more time on journal reviews because I get asked because I'm an expert. I get handpicked in a way by one of the editors, and then I only say yes if I know I can do the paper justice. So there's a difference there as well. And I can imagine if you're more junior, you maybe don't get asked as much, but you get asked because you're an expert. And like Phil said, you need more than 1 hour because you really want to understand the paper. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, the whole 1 hour thing is really, you have to decide your time. I'm just saying limit it, right? It's not an open-ended bottomless pit, or you'll just burn out and you'll feel inadequate and all the rest. Yeah, go. Uh-huh.
I can immediately tell whether I've communicated the idea clearly or not. As a reader, I find this useful.
Oh, so that's a good point. So your summary of their paper might be helpful to them, and you have experienced that. Yeah, that's fair enough. I suppose, as a reviewer, I've got finite bandwidth. So, and maybe I was partly trying to say that I'm saying, I think these are the contributions of your paper. Maybe that was my way of saying that part. Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, to me, it also sometimes is helpful to also just leave if I review a paper, I also like to leave it and finish the review the next day or 2 days after. Sometimes, especially if I find the paper confusing, I have negative emotions that disappear after some time. So I find that I'm able to write a much more objective review, and after giving it some time, it subconsciously kind of stews inside me, and sometimes I also understands the concepts better. I'm able to give better suggestions, I think, and yeah, just write a more objective review, I think, after some time. Then if I just read it, maybe find it confusing, and then immediately say no, this is I do not understand this.
Yeah.
Reject.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Maybe you're one of these people who they go to sleep at night with a problem and they wake up with a solution. I wish I was that kind of person. I go to sleep with a problem and I wake up while I still have a problem. Anyone else? This is all I'm going to say about reviewing, I think. Yeah, Samantha.
I wanted to build on you choose your language carefully to be nice to the reviewer. If there's something in the paper that I think is really good, sometimes I'll just say, I really liked your paragraph on page 5. Because if you've got a review of typo, got lost, it's just nice to get that, oh, that bit was nice. Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Something that I find very helpful when I'm writing a response to a review is if there's very concrete questions that you can easily quote. So instead of saying maybe, I think the main contribution is this, is that right? I'd prefer it if the reviewers wrote, is the main contribution X? Because then you can quote this and directly answer it in the response.
I thought by way of illustration as I was preparing for this talk, it might help just to put up an example review that I wrote a couple of years ago. I checked with the authors. They're happy for me to, this is Umut Akar and his colleagues, about parallel programming. But just as a way, it's because We can talk about things in general till we're blue in the face, but it might help just to see a little bit concrete. So this is my sort of top-level summary, strong, polished, well-written paper. This was a paper that I was keen on, we accepted, so I chose this review. Principled approach, pretty decent implementation, excellent stability. Then I did do a little bit about summarizing what the problem was. Lots of specific comments. And I said main concern. So this is what I meant about the sort of bulleted big issues. So here the big thing was, this paper was about determining whether if you've got parallel threads, can you have pointers between the parallel threads? Because if you have no pointers between the parallel threads, you can garbage collect them separately. And they have a dynamic test for this happening. And I was questioning here, is a dynamic test enough? You know, you're claiming, so I try to be concrete, right? You're claiming, line 183, that you relieve the program from complexities, but actually, do you really? And so I think it's okay to ask questions like this and then say, if you, let's see, what did I finish up this paragraph? Failing to acknowledge these difficulties makes the reader suspicious, better be upfront. So I'm trying to offer concrete feedback to the authors to say, if you just bring all this to the surface and say what you do and what you don't do, that's much better than letting the reader be suspicious about it. I had a little bullet here about they measured very low overheads, right? Their runtime test didn't cost much. And here I was asking, what's the limit case? Could you write some programs in which the thing was extremely expensive? And they didn't say anything about this. So this was all of my, I think this is still all the bigger issues. And then I went into a whole lot of line-by-line smaller issues. And this is all one review? Yes. Oh, no, actually, that was all the bigger issues. Now we're into smaller comments, so there are only 3. That was one review. So, but you can see that that took me, I'm sure that took me at least 2 hours to write. And this was also a paper that I said, I always take longer to write the review than reading the paper, because I'm always going back to the paper when I'm reading. And also, this was a paper that I liked, so I'm sure I overinvested in this review, right? Some are shorter. But I just wanted to give you some kind of concrete sense about I'm going about reviewing. I've got one last thing. Yes. I want to say one last thing, and then we can just have general to and fro. Oh, no, we're at time. I've got to stop. I've got to speak very, 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 very fast. Talk to the authors, right? So a conference like ICFP is an amazing opportunity to actually engage in conversation with the authors, right? So telling an author that you enjoyed their paper is always good. Even famous people love people telling them that they enjoy. I love it when people tell me that they enjoyed one of my papers. It's just a thrill. It really is. So do it, right? You know, and this is by email. You can also, you can approach people by email a little bit less, but if you've got something specific to ask, it can be helpful, and they'll often respond. Not always, but sometimes, maybe even often. But particularly at a conference like this, make the opportunity to talk to the authors, right? And people at a conference like this was all about the networking thing. And so the one thing I wanted to add to the networking thing is, you know, having done your homework, read their paper, been to their talk, then when you go up and introduce yourself, which you should do, maybe you can get somebody to introduce you, maybe not, but then don't just say, oh, you know, you're terribly famous and I'm a worm and it's great to meet you, right? You want to say, I really enjoyed your paper about this. It seems to have a little bit to do with what I'm doing, and then ask a specific question. Now, it's not that the specific question is to show how clever you are. It's a way into a conversation that gets past that initial moment of awkwardness in which neither of you quite knows what to say, right? So you've expressed general interest, you've been nice to them, but you're saying, can we just start here? And then maybe that will lead to something, and maybe it won't. But it means that it's not awkward, you know, then it's easy for you to either segue into a deeper conversation or to say, you know, I'm just going to get some coffee. Either way is fine. But I do think it's a good idea to have a starting point that is quite concrete and specific, that's to do with their work, not yours, right? Because they are interested in their work. They're not yet interested in your work. They will be polite. They will express interest with a bit of luck. But a good hook is to ask something about their work. And sometimes, just occasionally, it will turn out to lead to a long-term fruitful collaboration that will change the course of your life. You can't predict that. But it can and does happen. Okay, so I'm done. Thank you. We had a lot of to and fro. I just want to mention this last thing again. Use your experience as a reader to inform your work as an author. If you read papers with this interrogative, almost not quite aggressive, but certainly wrestling attitude, you will write papers differently, I think, right? Because you will write them for that kind of reader. Okay, good. Oh, well, yes, we don't need to do this because we've had plenty of discussion.
Yes, and in the interest of time, maybe we will take one question.
And the other thing to say is I'm going to be here the whole week, so please come and talk to me during the week. It'll be lovely to meet more of you.
Hi, thank you for this lovely talk and overview. I want to add one more thing. So you talked a lot about reading papers that have been published or are under review, but I would really encourage you all to read each other's drafts before you actually send it to a conference. So a lot of the things you said about reading critically, right, that can be a draft that somebody else has written because it makes ultimately the paper better before you send it off. So I think that's sort of a different dimension of reading. That is a gift. That's right. That's right.
Let's thank Simon again for this great talk.